Thank you for stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this Kenwood KR-6400 stereo receiver. A few weeks ago, I was at a local eating and drinking establishment. If you're familiar with Tucson, it's called Barrio Brewery, with a couple buddies, and somehow the subject came up that my friend Pete, who is from Chicago and hasn't lost his accent after being in Tucson for 40 years, had a Kenwood receiver of some unknown model number in his closet, packed away for probably a few decades. And would I be interested in looking at it? Sure, Pete, bring it on over. He brought over his turntable as well, which needs some help. But we plugged the receiver in and did a few little tests, and basically it just needed a clean and lube of the pots and controls. With that in mind, I took data on it, which we will see in a little bit to see how well it performed. The KR-6400 was sold between 1974 and 1976 and had a price of $450. It's rated at 45 watts a channel into 8 ohms, both channels driven at 0.3% THD or less, and the THD gets even less if you go to 22.5 watts per channel according to the spec. It's kind of a heavy unit. I weighed it in at 29.5 pounds. Heavy for a receiver, and it's very well built. I think it has some unusual features, and we'll go into that in a little bit. As always, there will be measurements to see how well the KR-6400 held up after nearly 50 years, and also what it sounded like. Right now I'm going to switch lenses so we can get a better close-up view of the front and then the rear, and then we'll get into the data. I bet you just can't wait. So here we have in all its grandeur the Kenwood KR-6400. Starting from the left, power switch is obvious, headphone jack. We do have your speaker selector here. We can run 3 sets of speakers off this, and you can select A, B, or C, and then A plus B or A plus C combinations. You have bass and treble controls. So here we have what's called the mode switch, and the positions are left, where the left channel is heard from both speakers. There is a right, there the right channel is heard from both speakers. There's stereo, and this provides a stereophonic reproduction of any stereo program source. The left channel is heard from the left speaker, and the right channel is heard from the right speaker. Reverse reverses the positions of the two speakers. The left channel is now heard from the right speaker, and the right channel is now heard from the left speaker. In the mixed position, the left and right channels are mixed together and heard from both speakers. So that's kind of a rundown of that. Here we have your input selection. We do have 2 phonos, although they're both moving magnets. We also have an auxiliary and a microphone input, and here is the mic jack right there. This is your FM muting switch. Here we have a low filter, here we have a high filter, and here we have the loudness switch. And here is the microphone jack, like I said earlier. This is your volume control, and there's a ring around it for your balance, and this is your tuning knob. So here we have the rear of the KR-6400 receiver. So this obviously is the built-in AM antenna. Here is the ground terminal for your 2 phonographs, and the phono 1 input would be here, phono 2 input here. Here is your auxiliary input. We also have your tape A monitor circuit here, which has a DIN jack, should your tape deck have a DIN jack capability. Here is the tape monitor B circuit here. Now, we have something called FM detector out, as well as 4-channel in and out. These jacks here and this switch that says normal or separate. And it's on normal, of course. Reading from the manual, the FM detector circuit output is made available here so that this receiver will be ready for 4-channel broadcasting developments in the future. When FM discrete 4-channel broadcasting becomes a reality, a simple demodulator connected here will enable you to fully enjoy this coming development. Well, I don't think quad broadcasting ever happened, or if it did, it was in just a very few markets. So anyway, that's kind of a unique feature that I haven't seen on any receivers yet. It also has connections for your AM and FM antennas. We have 1 switched outlet and 2 unswitched outlets. Obviously your push-in speaker terminals for the 3 sets of speakers. It has a voltage selection switch for either 110 or 220. And so that rounds up the rear of the KR-6400. So here is what the inside of the KR-6400 looks like with the cover removed, looking from the top down. So our first piece of data is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for a 5 watt into 8 ohm condition with the amplifier set to give 29 dB of gain. The SNR looks pretty decent and the THD looks pretty decent, and the THD plus noise isn't fantastic, but it's not bad. Here we have the frequency response under the same conditions as the previous data, i.e. 29 dB of gain and 5 watts into 8 ohms. It looks like it has about 2 dB of flatness, or to be nice, plus or minus 1 dB. So here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the Phono 1 input with a 5 millivolt signal applied. The specification is 0.3% THD, and the SNR is greater than or equal to 70 dB. So we're almost meeting the SNR, and our THD we are meeting. These are measured and spec'd at the tape monitor output. And here is the frequency response of the Phono 1 stage measured at the tape monitor output, and the spec for the Phono flatness is plus or minus 1 dB. And I'd say we're at that. It looks like it's about a dB of flatness, and the channels are balanced to maybe 0.6 of a dB. So here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the auxiliary input driven such that we are getting about 45 watts into 8 ohms for both of the channels. The only spec is THD, which is supposed to be less than 0.3%, and we're killing that. The SNR is at least 86 dB, which is pretty good, and the THD plus noise is in the 60s, which I guess is okay for an amp that's maybe 45 years old. So here's a plot that shows the effect of output power versus frequency and THD. And basically, when you hit the 45 watts a channel into 8 ohms, the distortion kind of rises once it gets to about 200 hertz and below. The other power levels look pretty decent across the band. So here we have the frequency response from the auxiliary input to the tape monitor output, and it's looking really flat, maybe 0.2 of a dB, worst case across the band. Pretty darn good. And here are the multi-tone test results from the KR-6400, and it looks to be about 70 dB or about 12 bits of distortion-free audio range. So how does the Kenwood KR-6400 stereo receiver sound after all these years? Well, I thought it sounded pretty good, as long as the loudness control wasn't switched on at high power levels, which makes sense based on the THD versus frequency and distortion and power levels graph. As long as you keep the loudness switch off once you hit about 5 watts, you should really enjoy the sound on this receiver. I was able to hit 88 dB SPL peaks, and according to my realistic APM 100 power meter, I was able to get peaks in the 50 to 60 watt range quite regularly, and I didn't hear any stress from the receiver. I measured the temperature at the top of the case after extended listening, and it reached maybe 120 degrees F, which is pretty cool. So it should be a great amplifier for the spare bedroom that my friend Pete is going to install it in, along with a Technics SLJ2 turntable that he also brought me to fix, but there's not going to be any video on that. And some old speakers that he has. I don't know what the speakers are, but I'm sure he will have a nice little vintage system going on there. Thanks for watching this episode of Vintage Audio Review. And if you have any comments, I would like to hear from you. And if you have not subscribed, please do so. And once again, have a great day or evening.